legislators and tries to educate them about what are really some very complicated issues, but very important issues. If you look at just the news coverage of the General Assembly, transportation funding for the past 5 years, it seems, has been a paramount issue. And that's only a small piece of the livability equation. And it's one of the ways in which what goes on here at the General Assembly building really does affect the places where you and I live. And Tripp gets that, so I'm very glad to have him here with us today to share his insights. Thanks, Tripp.
All right, just doing a quick schedule check so I don't hold people up from lunch too much. So, as Nathan said, transportation obviously is a critical part of overall livability, effort to build greener, healthier, safer, more vibrant communities. So I'm going to talk mostly about transportation and funding, but also just a little bit more about the broader context, and then try to leave plenty of time just for discussion, because there's many of you in the room, and I've been working on a lot of these issues. And I think one of the most beneficial things is to hear some things that are on your mind, and maybe everyone benefit from that expertise. But I'm going to give a little bit of background just because I know people will come at this issue from very different points. Some of the things that are shaping the push towards greener communities and some of the challenges that we're really up against on not only transportation funding, but more broadly on transportation and land use. And one of the biggest are the major demographic changes throughout Virginia, and I'm just going to give a little bit of background here, not focus on this much at all. As you can see, the rapid population increase that we experienced and to be projected to experience, which is what drives a lot of issues in transportation and land use area. Obviously, that's not uniformly distributed. You know, the vast majority of our growth is in the urban crescent and a few other places, and that's also where the majority of our funding debate is taking place. Other big shift, though, in demographics is not just the additional people, but it's the changing composition of what are our households like. There's a great decrease in sort of the oddly inherited model of single household or a married couple with children, which is what we built most of our transportation and land use systems around, but is no longer the dominant household composition in Virginia. And couple that with an aging population, which has very different transportation needs and very different needs, as well as the echo boomers, who are also much more interested in more mixed-use, walkable development. And all of those things are starting to show up, in how we talk about and push for transportation and these issues. So another big factor shaping any discussion of transportation is the fact that we are very wedded to the motor vehicle in Virginia, not least to anyone in this room, I realize. But just for some context, over 80 billion miles are traveled in Virginia every year. And that's an average of going farther than the distance to the sun and back every single day in the Commonwealth. So enormous amount of driving. And also just real quickly, I'll go quickly through a couple of statistics, but on our website, I've written a couple of reports looking at transportation and land use issues. If you want to find additional data, either see me later or at southernenvironment.org, you can find some of the reports that look at these issues. But that's a really eye-opening statistic, and I think it also is the fact that our miles driven has increased much more rapidly than population, especially say, the last 3 decades or so. In recent years, that's actually started to level off, which is an interesting trend. It's going to be interesting to see how much of that's due to the economic situation, how much of that's due to some of the demographic changes I mentioned earlier. Because that has enormous implications for what type of transportation investments we should be making going forward and the funding available. And then another final statistic here on driving is the fact that the vast majority of trips when you come on are solo driving. All this driving means a lot of issues in terms of funding and where we go and what we need. Maintenance needs are one of the biggest challenges in Virginia. As Nathan mentioned at the beginning, transportation funding has been a perennial debate in Virginia. It's been one of the hottest topics in the General Assembly each of at least the last 5 sessions. And one of the big factors is maintenance. I'll say a little bit more about this in a minute, but you may have heard, so you probably heard about McDonald's big transportation funding package we got through the General Assembly last session, primarily borrowing roughly $3 billion worth. That had $0 for maintenance. That was all for construction. So the maintenance part of the transportation funding puzzle was totally not addressed in the last session. As you can see, the statistic here of the number of miles of secondary roads are in particular bad shape in the Commonwealth because the money we do have for maintenance, we've been putting much more into interstate and secondary. So one result of all this, and where we put our money and putting so much into roads, is we don't have many meaningful choices in most of Virginia. If you want to go to school, to work, to shop, what have you, if you do anything other than drive, you take your life in your own hands. That's not to say that people don't want more choices. And actually, there's been some interesting evidence, even despite the lack of money that we put into other alternatives, the demand for those alternatives continues to grow. And in fact, nationwide, 2 of the 3 most rapid increase in terms of state-supported Amtrak systems, passenger rail in the country, were in Virginia in the last year. And statewide, we've seen a 25% jump in Amtrak ridership in Virginia just between 2007 and 10. VRE's seen record ridership, new services like the Tide down in Norfolk. I mean, people are hungering for greater transportation choices, as I know many of you experience in your advocacy work. But it's good to have some of these statistics because what we get all the time with the General Assembly, and I know we get at the local level as well, is, well, no one wants anything but to drive. So, and there's some good data as well about pedestrian and bicycle. There's been some great surveys, for example, in the Richmond region recently, the number of people who would love greater bike lanes. There's a huge pent-up demand for other options that we're not providing. So real quickly, our focus on the vehicle and what does it do has a number of impacts that I think as we think about the General Assembly and how we're going to try to change the dynamic, we can't just go in and argue about the environment. We're not going to get so far. So I'm going to touch on environmental impacts in a little bit, but how we've made the most progress in working in Virginia and actually Southern Maryland also. We work in 6 states in the South, all of which are very conservative politically. Fiscal and economic impacts are definitely the main area of argument over much of the debate on transportation funding, and it's where we need to position many of our arguments as well. And we shouldn't shy away from these arguments because they're very strong ones. I mentioned changing demographics, the market push that we're seeing in demand for greater transportation choices, but there's also the enormous infrastructure cost of the approach we've been adopting. This auto-centered, asphalt-centered approach has enormous impacts for taxpayers, as well as the cost of congestion, and households don't have any really good Virginia data, but the average Southern household spends more on transportation than anything other than housing. And it's a big business recruitment and economic development issue. And then, of course, the environmental and health impacts of our current transportation land use patterns is really not a single environmental issue that isn't tied pretty directly to transportation and land use patterns. All of you are very familiar with this. I'm not going to go into this in any detail, but just one thing about our transportation and land use impacts is cooled down in the recent years with the recession and housing, but Virginia has been on the pace to develop more land in the next 40 years than the previous 400. Obviously, for light driving, a lot of energy use, almost 5 billion gallons a year, and obviously puts us at great risk with the recent both rise in fuel prices as well as volatile fuel prices. So all of these are factors, I think, that are driving enormous interest in transportation issues and desire to do something different. As well as health impacts, let me mention that one as well. Virginia has been averaging 112 violations of current federal standards. That's over the last couple of decades. And continues to be high, so it's over 80 in the last year. But our approach basically has been to ignore these and continue to view asphalt and more roads as the answer to all of our problems. And that's been pretty much our approach to sprawl and land use as well. Has been to ignore these issues or to make them even worse. The McDonnell administration has been very heavily emphasizing road construction. This has been a bit of an evolving thing. At the gate, they were talking a lot about multimodalism, still are in some form, but you look where the money's going. The new 6-year plan that they adopted added, this is based on largely that slug of money that the General Assembly approved last session. At its $2.4 billion for highway construction, $0.2 billion for rail and transit. So it shows you the relative priority where we're putting our money.
What was that picture? Was that the Dixie Wall?
Yeah. And in terms of a lot of particular issues, I know a number of you are involved in some of these particular issues, but these are just some of the things that were either long dead or on life support that have been resuscitated within the last 24 months or so. The Charlottesville bypass, brand new 460, an Outer Beltway, Washington Transportation Corridor, Tri-County Parkway, some permutation of that, Coalfields Expressway, and a proposal to double I-81 from one end of Virginia to another for 325 miles to the Shenandoah down in southwest Virginia. Each of these projects, and quite a few of them, were either removed from the six-year plans and we were moving ahead with looking at other alternatives, because in almost every single one of these cases there are legitimate transportation needs and issues. And a key to the effective advocacy is to show better, cheaper, less destructive solutions. And we've done a pretty good job of that as an environmental community. Take the Charlottesville bypass, for example. We had the state actually funding a study looking at transportation land use alternatives in the 29 corridor north of Charlottesville, beginning to put money into parallel roads, because the real problem is local traffic, not through traffic, because 90% of the traffic in that stretch. So the idea was to get some of the local traffic off of 29. We've been moving ahead with that for about 6 or 7 years, and now that's all been pretty much thrown out the window in midnight this summer. So for those of you not familiar with that, as a textbook example of bad transportation planning and moving ahead from very, very destructive projects. So unfortunately, very emblematic of where we are on transportation. And this is a key issue when transportation funding comes up. There's a big drumbeat again and again and again about how we need more money for transportation. And if you look at things like I showed the statistic about the amount of estimate of dollars we need for maintenance, we do need a lot more money for transportation. We need a lot more money for maintenance, we need a lot more money for rail, we need a lot more money for transit bikes. But every time we get more money, it goes to projects like this, unfortunately. So it's a real challenge in terms of the funding picture.
You said that there's $2.4 billion going to highway construction.
That's new.
That's new.
Yeah.
Okay.
In the new 6-year plan. That's in addition to what was already in the previous 6-year plan for highway construction. So the total for highway construction in the 6-year plan is 8.5, 9 billion.
Do you know what they spend on repair and maintenance?
Per year, it's 1+. It's 1.4, I think 1.4 roughly billion. We've actually done not a bad job in Virginia spending money on maintenance. It's just we don't spend enough. Compared to some other states, we've done a pretty good job, but we're starting to push that needle the other way. So not only have we revived some of these projects, but some of the recent progress we've made in reforming some of our transportation policy, we've started to see some backsliding and some real assaults on it. For example, sorry for the acronyms there, but SSAR is a secondary street standards that I don't know if you're familiar with, but a number of you probably are not. Virginia, unlike most states, actually VDOT governs, administers, cares for secondary streets. And so the state actually sets the standards for what those need to look like to be accepted into the state system. So it's a hugely important potential leverage point to get things like better road connectivity, fewer cul-de-sacs, narrower roads with less runoff. And we've been successful in 2007 in getting the General Assembly to direct those standards to be written. The Kane administration, actually I was on the advisory committee that rewrote those, came up with some pretty good set of standards. Well, last General Assembly, there was a big fight. I know some of you were involved in that. We defeated the rollback of the standards, but VDOT was directed to look at how they might be adjusted or improved. Well, over the past 6 to 8 months, there was an advisory committee, actually Stuart Schwartz and I were on that, and it significantly weakened those standards. So it undid probably about 50% of the progress that we made. So we didn't go back to square one, but we definitely lost some momentum. Transportation impact analyses of TIA had not quite as big a rollback, but some little bit of trimming as well. So those are two that already in the last year we've seen regulatory rollback. Going into this session, I think we're going to see some more. The Governor's Reform Commission, one thing it proposed last year that did get through was eliminating the Rail Advisory Board. That's the RAB, sorry for all the acronyms. And that was a proposal that came out of the Reform Commission and was adopted by the General Assembly, which was a citizen board that provided a chapter on some of the rail funding. The new list that's out from the Commission, the good news is that it doesn't target transportation or land usage, which has a lot of bad ideas in it. But this year, at least, transportation use is 4. There's also, just so you know, as the background here heading into the session, another task force is looking at local mandates. And it's only had a couple of meetings, just came out with some draft recommendations the other day, one of which is to entirely eliminate traffic impact analyses. So one of the recent improvements in transportation policy it would do away with entirely. And it would relax or eliminate the urban development area or UDA requirements, which I'll say a little bit more about in a minute. They're meeting again next week. They haven't finalized these recommendations, but that's likely to be a source of some bills this session that we're not going to like. So that's a lot of the background. Now looking specifically at the session, I think money is going to be an issue again. We will see in the governor's budget what he's going to be proposing. That's where a lot of this is going to play out. But there may be some, I'm sure there will be some questions which ones will be in the governor's package. There will definitely be bills on funding. There are a slew every year. And we're likely to see everything from last year. There was a big attempt to change how we allocate the surplus, to take money away from things like the Water Quality Improvement Fund and put more into transportation. I think we may well see that again this session. The privatization of the ABC, I think we may have learned this lesson on that one, but who knows, we may see that again. 95 toll, the proposals to toll 95, there may be some legislation either to help show support of the General Assembly for that, because that's pending with the feds right now. But there are also a number of bills that I'm not very happy about that. There may be bills opposing it. So that's a funding bill that we may see. And then every year there are bills about how we allocate spending between the regions. I'm sure we'll see a dozen of those. Probably this year, like most, they won't go very far. No one wants to give up any money. But that will play out. But there also is the wild card of potential additional measures like the surplus allocation or something else that would take money from somewhere else, redirect some flows. I've heard there have a number of suggestions they've been vetting, but no one knows yet what's going to be proposed. So that's definitely a stay tuned item on here. The next one is, I'll say a little bit more about both of these in a moment, is the PPTA, the Public-Private Transportation Act. We see bills every year to move that forward. I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. The next is devolution. There's been a lot of talk about, I mentioned DDOT's responsibility for the secondary streets, and a lot of talk about turning those over to localities. Some people were expecting that to be a recommendation coming out of the Governor's Reform Commission. It did not come out of there. There's increasing sense there may not be a big push for that this year, although there may be legislation on it. As environmentalists, this really isn't as much our fight, although it's very important for what our communities look like. We will definitely keep an eye on it, but it's more a fight over money and who pays. And in some parts of the Commonwealth, we'd be better with the localities, frankly, setting the standards from DDOT. Others would be a lot worse. So, next item that we're likely to see something on, or at least some streamlining bills in terms of limiting environmental review of transportation projects further, or some other transportation agency reshuffling. There was a bill last session, for example, that would exempt transportation projects from almost all environmental permitting requirements that are state, not federal. They can't do that. But we may see something like that again in the session. And then the final one is something positive, which I'll say a bit more about in a moment, is some bills on likely on passenger rail So a little bit more on a couple of these. In terms of funding, as I mentioned, we don't know yet what we'll see. DCN's overall position, which is in the briefing book, is that anything, whether it's a budgetary provision or any bill, that we're kind of guided by these overall principles, which are first, putting more money in maintenance, making sure we're taking care of our existing infrastructure and communities first before we spend all this money on new areas. Shifting more money to other alternatives, passenger, freight rail, bike, pedestrian, transit. Tying money to more measurable performance measures, things like reducing the amount of VMT or vehicle miles traveled, the amount of driving we do. Instead of just, we just shove the money out the door right now without tying it to any performance measure, because most of these projects, like on the 460 or 20 miles, would never pass on any criteria like that. And then finally, trying to have more flexible allocation formulas that set a floor among modes so that we can ensure, for example, transit gets a certain amount of money statewide, but there's some parts of our regime that would go above that, and they're restrained a bit in the ability to do that. So those are sort of our general principles. Whatever funding bills come out, we want to see them kind of in the ballpark of doing this. Again, don't know what we'll see this session, but stay tuned. As for the PPTA, how many people, just rough sense, know what the PPTA is, or generally familiar? Okay, I know a number of you are. So it's Virginia's act. It's now about 15 years old, that promotes public-private partnerships. So the state puts some money in, typically, or often a lot of money in. The idea is to leverage private dollars, and then often that money gets factored in through tolls. So it's a way of stretching transportation dollars further in theory and getting the private sector to take some of the risk. For the most part, it hasn't worked out so much that way, but it's still a darling of both parties. Our last three governors have all embraced it. There's been a number of legislative tweaks since the act was adopted. McDonald even created a new Office of Transportation and Public-Private Partnerships. So there's increasing emphasis on this. The feds are increasingly promoting this as well. Again, it's a way, supposedly, to stretch limited public resources. But the track record in Virginia is that most of these projects end up taking an enormous chunk of public dollars and crowding out money that would be spent on other projects. So they've had a lot of unintended consequences. And they don't follow typically the normal planning process, because you can have unsolicited bids and other steps that kind of jump these to the top of this heap. And most of them, if you're going to have something that for a company to invest, float the bonds, put a total on, make their money back, the only facilities typically you can do that on are new terrain highways or significant expansions of existing highways. So the ones we've seen so far are like the Pocahontas Parkway, the 195 pot lanes, and the ones we're seeing in the works now are things like the brand new 460. We went through years of proposal on Dublin and Sarasota 81. Those tend to be the kind of projects that the PPTA fosters at the state level. And another fundamental policy problem with them are that often, to attract that private bidder and for them to get their bond funding, they've got to know pretty much they've got a captive audience. And part of the way you do that is through a non-compete or some version of non-compete clause that limits the state's ability to put other improvements in that corridor. So if we build you a new, say, 460, or right now there's a big issue with this for the Midtown Tunnel, we won't look at another improvement that might take away some of that traffic and put it on transit or some other road. So it constrains our ability to do other projects that may be in the public benefit. And it has definitely undermined the environmental process. You start to get putting the cart before the horse and getting way ahead of NEPA, for example, with a number of these projects. So it's just had a lot of problems. And you'll see in the briefing book we have a white paper that we put together on PPTA as well, and what we want to see going forward. No doubt we'll see some bills on this year. Don't know what form they'll take. One that DCN and a lot of our groups spent a lot of time on 2 years ago, I guess, was a STOSH bill that would, as a further sweetener of the pot, if you built one of these roads, you would get 5 streams of taxes that typically now go to the fund would go to the developer of that road. Any developer that happened to be built along that highway. So it would raid the general fund to encourage more road building. Terrible idea. Almost as bad as the feds drilling for road building idea. I mentioned the rail funding picture, and that's an interesting, somewhat more positive story, but a challenging story here. There's a change in federal legislation adopted several years ago, and that beginning in 2013, states are going to have to pay for all the regional train services. Estimated cost in that for Virginia is about $30 million per year. So it's, for example, the new Lynchburg to Charlottesville to DC line, some of the Richmond to DC lines, the ones that are additional state-supported service in the Amtrak system, Virginia would have to pick up the full cost of that unless Congress changes this. Now, there's a move to push this back, but if Congress doesn't, we're running out of time to do something about it. And the Department of Rail and Public Transportation has highlighted this. Last session, there was a bill, Virginians for High-Speed Rail was very involved in, a number of groups in DCN, we supported it, and others. It created a fund for passenger rail, but in that $3 billion plus package, they didn't put a single penny into the passenger rail fund. So we have the fund, but there's nothing in it. So the question is, are we going to have the money to keep that service running, let alone provide any additional services? DRPT did a study looking at alternative sources of money. There are different proposals before the administration right now. Don't know, we'll see whether they come out in support of any funding. They don't want to lose the train service. They don't want to take the money, though, from other transportation dollars. They want to use it for highways. And they also don't want any tax increase. So I'm not sure which of these they're going to compromise on. I think they're hoping that the feds kick the can down the road, frankly, and they don't have to bite this bullet. But there's a lot of momentum. Probably the lead candidate right now is a proposal to increase the fee on car rents by 4%, which would generate roughly $30 million a year, which is how much is needed to keep those trains running. So VCN, there's a white paper on this as well in the book. Our position is to support a dedicated source of funding to sustain that level of service and invest in infrastructure as well as qualify to match federal funds that might be available. I mentioned down there just the flag for prospects. I mean, clearly, with this governor and his ambition for higher office, with this House, anything that smacks to the tax increase is going to be a very tough sell no matter how compelling the need. So we will see if the administration endorses this idea of the higher rent car fee. It is before them. If they don't, or if they at least stay neutral on it, there will be a bill. Different patrons are being talked to now, but that is definitely something we'll see this session, and hope that all of you will help us on whatever form it ends up taking. So that's going to be an important fight this session. And then let me say a little bit about land use. Mainly, I was going to talk about transportation funding, but Nathan asked me to mention a little bit about land use. How many of you are familiar with or have heard about urban development areas? So there was legislation a couple of years ago that created them. I'll say a little bit more about them in a moment. But they're going to be under attack this session. There are definitely going to be some other attempts to roll back planning authority, local zoning authority, and then there are going to be some interesting fights over possibly in the budget and possibly over easements, though it doesn't look like it, over land conservation and historic preservation. So I'm not going to go into those in detail, but Nathan asked me to talk a little bit about the UDAs. So in 2007, as part of this omnibus effort, passed a number of transportation land use bills, and it was strengthened in 2010 by the General Assembly. What it does, it requires fast-growing localities to designate areas, urban development areas or UDAs, for where they want to target growth. It's not to say that all their growth has to occur there. There are just a ton of misconceptions about UDAs. But it's a way to promote higher density in targeted areas, provide service. I mean, there's a lot of, mainly was done for fiscal reasons as much as environmental and community development reasons, but it had a broad base of support. But last year, in 2011, there was a bill to try to gut the UDAs. The Tea Party has latched onto this as a major issue. They're convinced that this is part of the UN plot. Agenda 21, I don't know how many of you have run into the Agenda 21 rhetoric. If you haven't, you probably will sooner or later in the community, because it's spreading throughout Virginia now. A number of these groups have gotten some funding from some national sources to spread the word. And at the state level, one of their targets is going to be UDA this session. Bob Marshall carried the bill last year. He's already said he's going to carry it this year. We've had him with seminars around the state with the Tea Party heads to draw attention to this. I've heard that it's going to be also in the Attorney General's website. So, yeah, so we will see. He was silent on it last year. Last year it got through the House. A year after the House had passed provisions to strengthen UDAs, they passed a bill to pretty much cut the whole thing. That was an election year, maybe, who knows what will happen this year. And it's unclear whether the leading bill is going to be to eliminate this requirement entirely or just make it permissive to essentially eliminate it. And then there's also some smaller provisions that I've heard that would just exempt certain localities, smaller localities trying to do this. Those have a much better chance, and some of those actually I think we can work at a compromise on. The politics on this are very interesting. Last year, as I said, it passed the House but died in the Senate. And so we will see. This is likely to be a big area of debate for those of you interested in the link between transportation and land use. A very important issue, and it is very much in the crosshairs of Tea Party. And these are just some of the benefits of UDAs. But as I said, they are under attack, and it's going to be an interesting session. So that's a really quick scan of a whole lot of issues and some of the main things that we see coming in the pike, as well as the main issues that we as VCM as a group are taking a stand on. With the SELC hat, we'll be working on actually every single one of those issues. Virginia's going to be very involved in the rail funding bill. We'd love to have y'all's help on any or all of these. It's going to be a challenging time. As Nathan said at the very beginning, it's a very hot, important issue and it really touches on just about every environmental challenge and community challenge that we face in Virginia. So I thank you all for everything y'all have done, and just open it up for questions, comments, discussion, other issues you'd like to talk about.
Where is the Builders Association on
On the UDAs,
Yeah.
the home builders have supported. There was an interesting alliance. No one was totally happy with the legislation, but the home builders and much of the conservation community supported it. We were trying to combat sprawl and promote walking. They were trying to get greater authority to do more compact in certain areas. So through last session at least, they continued to support it, even in the face of the attack. A lot of the local governments that supported it earlier on have now switched. So Fremont and Waco are not really helping us in this at all. In fact, I'm not sure if officially they're split. Some of the localities like it, some don't. So I'm not sure whether they'll be official this year.
Is that switch in part because of changes in local electoral political leadership?
No. Now we'll see what happens this year because of those changes in local leadership. There may be further changes. It was more, they were not wholly supportive of it initially because they had differences with the ranks. Most of the ranks thought it was a good idea. As more smaller localities that aren't as active started to hear about it, they had nothing better than and it was more of a question of smaller jurisdictions. Because a lot of larger jurisdictions do this already. I mean, Albemarle County, for example, has done this for 20-some, 30 years. I mean, it's Fairfax. I mean, this isn't a radical concept.
As far as rail goes, most roads are public, at least right now, unless they give them to private companies to make them toll roads. But the rails are, about 1860, have been privately owned. Do you have any information on who owns the rails and equipment in Virginia?
It's mostly privately owned. So CSX and Norfolk Southern own the vast majority. They're the two main Class 1 railroads in Virginia. So most of the lines that are being looked at for passenger rail expansion or currently have passenger rail opening are owned by either CSX or Norfolk Southern, the lion's share. So for example, the 95 corridor is being CSX, the Charlottesville to DC one is Norfolk Southern, the new rail that the General Assembly is planning will be created reconnecting Richmond and Norfolk for the first time in 30 years is a little bit of CSX, but mostly Norfolk Southern. So
And
it differs around the state.
the Boston to New York corridor, the trains there can't go as fast as they should be able to because the rails that they're running on are privately owned and they aren't up to the speeds
That's right.
that the trains are working at. Is
Same
there
problem-
any conversation
same problem
about
in
the
Virginia.
idea of creating a public-private rail?
There's been discussion of that at the federal level, which is what it would take to really address this. We can barely keep the limited funding capacity rail we have. So frankly, it's a great idea, but I don't think there's political votes for it. The House tried to zero out Amtrak just 2 months ago. So it's an excellent idea, and it's also been talked about at the state level in Virginia. I don't think there's politically it's viable at this time.
I understand that the rail system in Virginia was originally funded by the state, but after around 1850,
That's right.
they sold it.
And that's true for most rail systems nationwide. They were built primarily with public dollars. They were turned over to the private sector at some point, and then it differs depending on the state, and most of them are now in private hands. So that makes the passenger rail very tricky because most of their money they make is off the freight rail. So, for example, most of your delays if you're ever riding Amtrak from the 95 corridor, a lot of you running Amtrak, you're on the CSX. Their rail, and they make you wait for the orange juice trains and things like that.
Does the rail funding and legislation cover like light rail that they built in Norfolk?
It does not.
It does not.
Yeah, as it's going to be written, it's intercity passenger rail. So the light rail really falls more within the transit basket. Light rail really tends to get funded more through that than the fund that the General Assembly created last session was for the intercity passenger rail.
I have a question. The proposal to expand I-81 to handle the immense amount of truck traffic, and the alternative is a kind of an integrated truck rail. Where are the trucking and rail interests on that proposal? Are they in favor? I mean, without,
Yeah.
they have to be in support of it
Absolutely.
in a big way for that to happen.
Absolutely.
Are they?
It depends on which version you're talking about. Some of you may be familiar with Rail Solution has a grander vision in that corridor that Norfolk Southern doesn't like. Upgrading the existing corridor, very much like you mentioned, the speeds in the northeast is the same problem on this line. It's very slow right now. It's a lot of heading and getting along there. Norfolk Southern actually does have what they call a crescent corridor plan. Actually, they're trying to upgrade that line and stretch it all the way almost to New York to New Orleans. And that's what parallels I-81 is Norfolk Southern to. So they're very interested in that. They've gotten some state funding for it. They've gotten some federal funding, not for the Virginia part, but for some other facilities that are part of that project for the Tennessee Line. Yes, they are supportive. Truckers are a mixed bag. They did not like the PPTA proposal because that was going to result in a massive toll. So they fought that proposal, but on the whole, they're supportive of widening those.
So, I mean, is there any move to get funding for that? I mean, instead of putting it into the expansion of I-81, to use some of those funds in a way to make that
Yes.
a more palatable?
There is. Unfortunately, this administration is showing a little less interest in that, but there are a number of alternatives to highway projects. But it's still an open one, and they're going to be having what I've been told is they're going to develop a new master plan for that. Looking at the railroad goals of road expansion and rail, and they're going to kick that off in 2012. So that would one, if you're interested in that issue, absolutely keep an eye on that one and weigh in, because that's going to be critical for the public to weigh in.
And that'll be open to an integrated solution?
They say right now, all solutions are on the table. So we'll see.
So I had another question, going off the public or private ownership. In states where they have gone ahead with high-speed rail or are planning it, California is one there. Is that a privately owned thing still, or are the high-speed?
It varies. Some of the states actually own some of the right of way, because it's new. California, for example, is a new right of way, and they actually have authority. It's purchasing some of it. Almost all the high-speed rail lines require, we don't have a whole lot of favors to put up there. But there are some examples. I mean, for example, the state of North Carolina actually, still, they own huge chunks of rail. They kept it. Some of it's just historical accidents. They kept some sections that they actually own. So the high-speed rail from Charlotte to Raleigh, for example, I think is all one that is here. From Raleigh to Richmond, you do all.
So for in Virginia, to get high-speed,
Virginia is all
we would
private.
have to.
And there's a lot of the money in the state budget went to MPOs. The Richmond region MPO is proposing a lot of, I think, good transit things. Do you feel they're good and they're effective, or they're going to get what they want? Or?
Yeah, people, MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations, they're a creature of federal law that are in larger municipal areas. You have to have them as a planning body. And the way it sets it up is it's a partnership of responsibility. Some things that the state does, so for example, VDOT and the governor have authority in setting their own institute plan. Then MPOs actually create as well a long-range plan as well as a shorter-range plan. And the two are supposed to feed into each other. They don't always work that way. In some states, MPOs have more power than others. They get work, they get out of that, and the states hash it out. Virginia's more DOT heavy and MPO power. And the MPOs have authority, and they have veto authority over projects. If they don't put a project that's federally funded in their plan, they can't get money, no matter how badly the state wants it. Now, MPOs have tried to do that, and they're threatened with whether or not really many projects should be on our plan. So, it's you can imagine the politics and the dance of that, but there's huge opportunities for MPOs to push us in a more balanced direction. Richmond's been a bit of a laggard. They're doing better. They actually have a candidate list for projects. It was just about to come closed on this last week. They're going to be going through their long-range planning process over the next 6 months or so. So I encourage you to weigh in to keep pushing more. The city projects are pretty good. There's a number of transit bike-ped projects in the city.
But they have some expansion of Canada. Okay.
Yeah, some counties, like Chesterfield, for example, have
They have, but they do have, they have had 360, they're starting, they've got 360, 60, and stuff like that.
But if you look at the relative percentage of where the money's going, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned a lack of passenger rail funding in the state budget, but there have been some funding of particular projects,
Yes.
like the Norfolk train.
Yes, I mentioned the Norfolk train.
How does that happen? Is that ad hoc?
There's two ways. There is something called a rail enhancement fund that exists now. It's $20 to $24 million a year. It can go to passenger, but it almost always goes to freight. So Class 1 railroads, have a political pull. But some of that money was used for this Norfolk project, and then the General Assembly actually, through the budgetary process, put some money into that. So that one was kind of did a little bit of an in run around the planning process in the General Assembly. Actually directed some. So that was done partly through the budget and public. So that's the avenue for passenger rail to fund it. When the Kane administration started the pilot line from Winsford to DC and then Richmond from Richmond, I believe they used a mix there as well as some rail enhancement funding in the effects. So they can do it if they want to. There's several pots. Those are some of the key places. The idea of the separate pot of money is that we can have a dedicated fund. We wouldn't have to